All right, so today we're diving deep into virtue epistemology. I bet you've heard of epistemology, right? Like the study of knowledge and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But, when you throw in that word virtue, things start to get pretty interesting. We've got these excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to kind of guide us through it.
Buckle up, we're going in?
Yeah, so what's really cool here is that virtue epistemology, it isn't just about figuring out what knowledge is. It's more about understanding what makes someone a good knower.
So it's not just about like, is this belief true or justified or whatever. It's about like the person who has that belief, like their intellectual character, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Yeah, so virtue epistemologists, they're really interested in the traits, the intellectual traits or virtues, I guess, that contribute to, reliable, insightful knowing. Things like, intellectual humility or curiosity, open-mindedness, carefulness, all those qualities that can make someone a more effective knower, a more responsible knower.
Right. That makes it like in any field, you can have someone who's like just naturally gifted, right? But if they're not also like disciplined and meticulous and willing to learn, they're probably not going to reach their full potential. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And virtue epistemology brings that same kind of thinking to the realm of knowledge. It's not just about having a high IQ or, being able to just spout off facts. It's about cultivating the intellectual habits and dispositions that allow you to really understand and engage with the world.
Okay, so we're talking about the how of knowing, not just the what, right? But I'm curious, how do virtue epistemologists actually define those intellectual virtues? Is there a set list, or is it more of a subjective thing?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's actually led to some pretty interesting debates within the field. One of the key distinctions is between what are called virtue responsibilists and virtue reliabilists.
Oh, intriguing.
Yeah.
So what are the like main differences between those two approaches?
Well, responsibilists, like the name suggests, they really emphasize the role of responsibility in intellectual virtue. They see these virtues as, character traits that we develop through conscious effort and practice. Think of it like developing a skill, like playing an instrument or mastering a sport. It takes dedication, discipline, and a willingness to reflect on your performance and learn from your mistakes.
Right. So for a responsibilist, being a good knower, it's an active pursuit. It's something you have to like work towards.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not just about, acquiring knowledge. It's about developing the right kind of relationship to knowledge, like being open to new ideas, being willing to revise your beliefs when you're presented with evidence, being intellectually humble. These are all hallmarks of the responsible knower.
Yeah, I get that. It's like, I mean, you could read every book in the library, but if you're not also like critically evaluating the information, challenging your own assumptions, being open to different perspectives, then you're not really engaging with it in a virtuous way.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where the reliabilists come in. They tend to focus more on the reliability of our cognitive faculties. They're interested in things like perception, memory, intuition, those basic tools, that we use to form beliefs about the world.
Okay, so while responsibilists are looking at the character of the knower, reliabilists are more concerned with the mechanics of how we acquire knowledge.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, for a reliabilist, an intellectual virtue is something that tends to produce true beliefs. So if you have a particularly good memory or a knack for spotting patterns, that could be considered an intellectual virtue from a reliabilist perspective.
Interesting. So it seems like both approaches kind of have something valuable to offer. But I'm curious, how do they deal with the question of whether we actually deserve credit for the knowledge we acquire? Like, if I just happen to guess the right answer on a test, is that as good as actually knowing it?
Oh, that's a great question, and that gets to the heart of what's known as the value problem in epistemology.
The value problem.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, it goes back to this idea that knowledge is something valuable. It's something that we strive for. But if knowledge can be acquired through sheer luck or through processes that we don't have any control over, does it still, hold that same value?
Right, because it seems like the way we acquire knowledge, like it should matter. If I study really hard for a test and I ace it because I truly understand the material, that feels different from just, like guessing the answers correctly and getting lucky.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And virtue epistemologists would argue that it's precisely because of those intellectual virtues, the effort, the discipline, the open-mindedness that the first scenario is more valuable.
So it's not just about the end result, but it's about the process, like the intellectual journey that got you there.
Yes, exactly. And that's where virtue epistemology really shines. It provides a framework for understanding why certain ways of knowing are better, are more valuable than others. It's not just about being right, it's about like earning that knowledge, about using your intellectual muscles, so to speak, to get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, hitting a bullseye is more impressive if you're a skilled archer, right? Not if the arrow just kind of like happens to land there by some fluke.
A perfect analogy. Yeah. The skilled archer has honed their craft, right? They've put in the time and the effort to develop those skills, and that's what makes their achievement, meaningful.
So a virtuous knower is like a skilled archer, just, carefully aiming their cognitive arrows towards the target of truth.
Precisely. And just like an archer needs to be aware of, factors like wind speed and distance, a virtuous knower needs to be mindful of their own biases, their own limitations, and the potential for error.
Wow, this is all really thought-provoking. Like suddenly I'm questioning everything I thought I knew about knowing. But before I spiral into some kind of existential crisis, I think it's time to maybe delve a little deeper into some of the specific challenges and nuances of virtue epistemology. Like, what about all this talk of epistemic luck and testimonial injustice? I'm intrigued, but also a little confused.
Oh, those are great topics to explore. Why don't we take a short break, and when we come back, we can dive into those fascinating complexities. So, before the break, we were talking about how virtue epistemology really emphasizes the how of knowing, not just the what, and how that kind of ties into the value that we place on knowledge.
Right, right. And you mentioned some really interesting concepts like epistemic luck and testimonial injustice. And I have to admit, those terms, they sound a little intimidating.
Yeah.
Can you break those down for us a little bit?
Of course, of course. Let's start with epistemic luck. This is a really thorny issue that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. Essentially, it's the idea that sometimes we arrive at true beliefs or even knowledge through sheer luck rather than through any merit of our own.
So it's like I could win the lottery, and that would be a true belief, right? Like I have a winning ticket.
Right.
But it wouldn't be because I'm some kind of lottery genius. It would just be like the luck.
Exactly, exactly. And that raises some really interesting questions for virtue epistemology. Remember we were talking about how virtue epistemologists see knowledge as an achievement, as something that we deserve credit for because we've used our intellectual virtues to get there. But what happens when luck plays like a significant role? Does it undermine the value of that knowledge?
Yeah, it seems like it would, right? Like if I just stumble upon a truth by accident, it doesn't feel like I've really earned that knowledge.
Right, right. That's the challenge. And there are different ways that virtue epistemologists try to address this. Some argue that we need to distinguish between, different kinds of luck. For example, there's a difference between being lucky in your environment, like, stumbling upon a rare fossil while you're out for a walk, and being lucky in your cognitive processes, like having an unusually accurate memory.
So maybe some kinds of luck are more acceptable than others when it comes to knowledge. Like it's one thing if I'm just in the right place at the right time, but it's another thing if my own like thinking is flawed or unreliable.
Right, right. That's one way to think about it. Some virtue epistemologists focus on trying to identify those cases where our intellectual virtues are truly responsible for our true beliefs, where luck plays a minimal role. They're looking for what you might call pure or credit worthy knowledge.
That makes sense. But I can imagine it could be pretty tricky to like disentangle luck from genuine intellectual virtue in real world situations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where things get, even more complex because it's not just about, individual luck. It's also about the social structures and systems that shape our access to knowledge and influence how we evaluate information.
Right, right. And that brings us to testimonial injustice, right? Which you mentioned earlier.
Yes, yes. Testimonial injustice is a really important concept that highlights the social dimension of virtue epistemology. Essentially, it occurs when someone's testimony, their claims, their knowledge is dismissed or discounted because of, prejudice or bias.
So it's like if I tell you something and you automatically assume I'm wrong because of my gender or my race or my age or some other aspect of my identity.
Exactly, exactly. And that's a huge problem because it means that people from marginalized groups are often denied the recognition and the credibility that they deserve as knowers. Their voices silenced, their experiences are invalidated, and their contributions to knowledge are just they're ignored.
Yeah, and that's not only unfair, it's also like epistemically harmful, right? Because we're missing out on valuable perspectives and insights.
Precisely, precisely. Testimonial injustice, it distorts our collective understanding of the world. It creates these blind spots in our knowledge, and it reinforces existing power dynamics.
Man, this is really making me think about how much trust is involved in knowledge. Like we're constantly relying on others for information, whether it's our friends, our teachers, experts in various fields, or even just random people on the internet.
It's true, yeah, and virtue epistemologists are increasingly interested in understanding, how social factors like trust, authority, power, how they influence our epistemic practices. They're looking for ways to create more just and equitable system of knowledge production and dissemination.
So it's not just about being a good thinker yourself, but it's also about like contributing to a more just and inclusive epistemic community.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's about recognizing that knowledge is a collective endeavor, and that we all have a responsibility to ensure that everyone has a fair chance to participate and be heard.
Wow, this is all very, very eye-opening. It's like virtue epistemology isn't just about, individual minds, but it's also about the social and structural forces that shape how we know and what we know.
Exactly, exactly. And this brings us to, some even more fascinating and challenging ideas within virtue epistemology, like the concept of extended or embedded intellectual virtues.
Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. What are extended or embedded virtues?
Well, think about it this way. Our thinking, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's shaped by all sorts of external factors like the tools we use, the information we have access to, the people we interact with, even the physical spaces that we inhabit.
So like our environment almost becomes part of our cognitive toolkit.
In a way, yeah, yeah. And extended virtue epistemology argues that our intellectual virtues can be kind of distributed across these external elements as well. For example, a well-designed library, it can actually enhance our ability to learn and understand. It can make information more accessible. It can help us to connect ideas and even, inspire us to ask new questions.
That's fascinating. So it's like the library itself almost becomes part of our extended mind, helping us to be more intellectually virtuous.
That's the idea, and this has some really interesting implications, right? It suggests that we can cultivate intellectual virtue not just through individual effort, but also through designing more supportive and just epistemic environments.
So we could say that like a university with a diverse faculty and a robust library system and a culture that values, open inquiry and critical thinking, that it's actually contributing to the intellectual virtue of its students.
Precisely, precisely. And this line of thinking opens up, all sorts of possibilities for thinking about how we can design better schools, better workplaces, even, online communities to foster intellectual virtue and promote a more just and equitable pursuit of knowledge.
This is
It's
all this is all incredibly thought-provoking. It's like virtue epistemology is branching out,
Yeah.
like connecting with other fields like cognitive science, social psychology, even architecture and design.
It is. It is. And that interdisciplinary approach is leading to some really, really groundbreaking insights. It's helping us to understand not just how individuals can become better knowers, but also, how we can create systems and structures that support and amplify intellectual virtue.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how virtue epistemology is much more than just an abstract philosophical theory. You know,
Huh.
it has real-world implications for how we learn, how we share knowledge, how we organize our societies, even how we design our built environments.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it such a vital and relevant field of study, today. It's not just about armchair philosophizing. It's about understanding how we can, create a world where knowledge is pursued in a more just, equitable and responsible way.
I'm completely on board with that. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to process. Maybe we should pause here for a moment and give everyone a chance to catch their breath before we move on to our final thoughts.
That sounds like a good plan. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into virtue epistemology.
All right, so we're back, and I got to say this deep dive into virtue epistemology has really got me thinking about like what it actually means to be a good knower.
Yeah, it really makes you think beyond just, having true beliefs, right? It kind of pushes you to examine the processes, the habits, even the social structures that shape how we know and what we know.
Right, exactly. And before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to a topic we touched on earlier, those fascinating epistemic emotions.
Oh yeah, yeah. Those feelings that sort of accompany our pursuit of knowledge. Curiosity, wonder, doubt, skepticism, all that. They all play a role in shaping our intellectual journeys.
It's interesting to think about how much those emotions actually like influence our thinking, even if we're not like consciously aware of it all the time.
It's true, yeah. Curiosity, it can draw us toward new information. It can drive us to explore, different perspectives. Wonder can inspire us to dig deeper, to seek out a more profound understanding. On the other hand, doubt and skepticism can act as like safeguards. They can help us to filter information and avoid, falling prey to misinformation or bias.
Yeah. It's like they're our internal compass guiding us through this complex landscape of knowledge.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. And just as a compass can, malfunction and lead us astray, so too can our epistemic emotions. Unchecked curiosity can lead us down these rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. Excessive doubt can paralyze us. Make it difficult to form any beliefs at all.
Right. So it's not just about having the right emotions. It's about like developing a healthy relationship with those emotions, learning to recognize them, to manage them, and even to harness their power for good.
Exactly. Yeah. Virtue epistemology really emphasizes the importance of cultivating what some call epistemic resilience. It's the ability to navigate the uncertainties and complexities of knowledge without losing our way. It's about being able to embrace doubt without falling into despair, to be open to new ideas without becoming gullible, and to hold on to our convictions while remaining open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Yeah, and that sounds absolutely crucial in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides, often with conflicting claims and hidden agendas and all that.
Absolutely, and it highlights the importance of of those other intellectual virtues that we've been talking about. Intellectual humility, open-mindedness, even intellectual courage, right? It takes courage to admit that you might be wrong, to change your mind in the light of new evidence, to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular.
And it takes humility to acknowledge our own limitations, our own biases, the fact that we don't have all the answers, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, virtue epistemology, it reminds us that being a good knower, it isn't about, achieving some kind of perfect objective understanding. It's an ongoing process, of learning, growing, and refining our thinking. It's about developing those intellectual habits and dispositions that allow us to engage with the world in a curious, responsible, and open-minded way.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking exploration. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of virtue epistemology, but in a way that makes me even more curious to learn more.
That's the mark of a true learner, and that's ultimately what virtue epistemology is all about. It's about cultivating that lifelong love of learning, that desire to understand the world around us, and that commitment to using our knowledge for good.
I think our listeners are leaving with a lot to chew on, a lot of new ideas to ponder, and maybe even a renewed sense of excitement about the pursuit of knowledge.
I hope so. I hope so. And remember, being a good thinker, it isn't just about being right. It's about approaching knowledge with the right kind of intellectual virtues, with curiosity, with rigor, and with a healthy dose of humility.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into virtue epistemology. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and stay curious.